the very broad topic is epic reporting, but I think it helps to kind of give people a preamble as to what happened in the digital process. So pre-go live, we had analog notes. We were literally on paper. Anaesthetic charts were on paper. The whole hospital, I think, well, ITU had ISIP, but there were lots of different pockets of applications within the system. Visibility was a problem. You turn up on the morning of surgery, the notes wouldn't be there. And it brought up a lot of safety concerns, continuity, patient experience. You know, you turn up and you don't have the notes, so therefore you clerk your patient from scratch. That's what life looked like before go live. We had 192 different applications, believe it or not. Clinically, probably we only used about 5. There was one for, you know, your NHS mail, there's one for your bloods, one for your x-rays, one for your echoes. And this kind of story is very, very common in lots of NHS trusts all over England. Most of the time it's multiple logins. So if you have one login for your Windows, you'd have a different one for CDI, you'd have a different one for your echoes, etc. And quite often people didn't have access because they didn't do the bit of the e-learning, etc., to get the different parts of the results. So often clinical doctors rely on being able to write a note, maybe being able to pull the blood results, order an x-ray, and then some people would be able to order it, you know, get an echo result on the system. So that's like the Infoflex system. But often it's very, very disjointed in lots of different hospitals. And there's a cost to doing nothing. So by maintaining every single one of those applications, there's a cost of, you know, maintaining all of those things. So there was a choice between using Cerner versus Epic. These are the 2 biggest EHRS systems in the entirety of probably the world. In the UK, I think we're probably more Cerner based, so it's more common for people to have seen Cerner before in this country. I think in the States, it's kind of equal. And the big difference is that Cerner allows you to do what I call a minimal install. It will say, okay, fine, you can just use like effectively the CDR aspect where you can just see letters and notes and chart review. But it actually does have all of the capability that Epic has. The difference is that all of the different modules, so my chart, the patient portal, for example, was a startup, and they acquisitioned that startup into Cerner as a company. And what happens with that is that every single acquisition that they make is coded in a different language, because everybody does their own thing and they acquisition it, and then they say, right, now we need to integrate it, and therefore they use another piece of code to integrate like the patient portal for Cerner into the main part for Cerner. So they've got an IT module, they've got an anaesthetic module, but most hospitals are looking for a cheap install. So therefore they don't have all of the extra bolt-ons that Cerner actually, that is available via Cerner. Generally speaking, it's quite out of the box, it's quite intuitive. People put the number into patient station, they're meant to open a particular encounter, and then they document their notes, etc. Customization is possible, but the Cerner team do all of the customization, and the data extraction is also possible, but it's via a data team. So Epic on the converse side, let me just move, can I move this out of the way? No, is more upfront in terms of cost, but all of it is developed in-house by your own team. So I'll go through how we went live. The slight benefit is that it's all in the same coding language. So all of the Epic stuff is coded in-house in the same coding language, and therefore you don't get the same integration problems between the patient portal, between anaesthesia, between intensive care, between all of the other different departments in the hospital. I found it relatively complex to use well. So all of the little bits of training, extended training, etc., I'm constantly going, oh, I didn't know that you could do that. And despite quite an extensive induction program, I still think we only use this to probably about 5 to 10% of our capability. It's customizable by an in-house team. So if I need to do something, I mean, I can do some of the front end build, etc. And the idea is that end users can get access to their data. And then if you look at Epic hospitals, the Epic hospitals have a community, and there's supposed to be like institutional collaboration. So actually, it's probably more of a clinician-driven piece of software. So Cerner is something that's given to you, you use it. Epic's probably like more, oh, what does the organization want to do in terms of digital engagement? So we chose Epic because we wanted to be able to get at the data from an end user perspective. And Epic give a really amazing program of support. So we had an implementation, which is the red one on the left-hand side. We then ended up training. They walk you through the process of customization. Then you train all of your people, you go live, and then you end up doing lots of optimization. And we constantly have something. We've got Gina, who's our technical support person, and Gina will help if I say, oh, okay, actually we want to put COVID screening questions in, for example. She'll make sure and help us to actually make sure that we can actually get the reports out at the other end. So Epic software, it was founded in 1979, and with the aim of trying to help people get well, stay well, and help future generations get healthier. If you're interested in the capability of the software, Epic have quite a nice little thing on their website, and they have 250 million records worldwide. And why am I telling you all of this? It's quite a complex piece of software, and it's got lots of capability to it. So understanding the sort of the bigger structure and the broader capabilities, I think, is useful. If you're given something and told to use it, quite often you get user disengagement. So Cerner, for example, if you ask people day to day, and I do go around and I say, also, where did you come from? Where did you work before? What systems did they have? What's your experience? Most clinicians will tell you, oh, I was in a hospital, it had Cerner, it was bloody awful. You can't find your right thing, it's not filed in the right place, it was really difficult to get information, it's all right. But effectively, they don't say, this is an amazing system, actually, I want to get involved in helping make it better. So Epic's different. They say, okay, they want user engagement. And often when you give somebody something out of the box, the person will be like, oh, well, I'm special, UCLH are unique. The software doesn't suit our workflow and it's not built for us. So Epic give you the capability to customize the foundation out of the box software, and it's customized by you and it's customized for you. So they take clinical teams and then basically customize all of the software. And that's what we did at Go Live. So we had a team from various numbers of backgrounds, and this is a picture of them. And this is the build team structure. So this is where we start to understand that op-time and anaesthesia is op-time and anaesthesia. We do pre-assessment, but ITU is separate. ITU is built by ClinDocs. And then if you want to do anything to do with clinics, it's organized by Cadence. And if you want to do anything to do with orders, it's done by a different team. So when somebody says, oh, actually, I want to redo a whole workflow, actually it involves a number of different people, and actually you have to get all of those people on the same line, which is why it's so difficult. If you want me to say, oh, actually, I just want COVID screening questions in pre-assessment, it's very easy for me to do because I own that piece. I'm in that build team and I can make those changes. But if you said to me, oh, actually, there's a piece between like me and Rick basically have to work out, okay, how does the data flow from anaesthetics to ITU? And are we on the same page? Because we may well have built something completely different. And the airway plan is like one example of that, where, we would document it in one way. And Rick came to me and said, well, the information comes through in completely different formats. So actually what you need to do is put the information in where we can see it in the correct way. So that's where the front end kind of starts getting tangled up. This is basically at Go Live, everybody was like, I must get this built into Epic. My piece of paper, my checklist has to be built into Epic. And we ended up with this kind of labyrinth of bits of build all over the place. This is an example, actually, we had quite a lot of staff, but only about 50% of people had ever used an EHRS before Go Live, and only 50% touch typed. We used that as a metric just to say how many people are digitally capable. And I know that's not, an amazing measure, but it was some sort of benchmark of how many people would know how to use a digital system. So this is a picture about change management and engagement. And I really do need to try and move this. I need to move this out of the way because it's really not. And I think all of you are galloping off into the distance going, oh, I've got a little project on UTI management. I've got a little project on head and neck readmissions, and I want to find out about antibiotics. And here's me struggling in the background because I know the setup that we need to get to where you guys are. And it will be good. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So at Go Live, we integrated all of the models and then worked out that actually the information doesn't flow correctly because we've done a load of customization. But let's get on to the meaty stuff. This is why you're all here. You want to know how to get data out of Epic. There's a particular module of a reporting team. So it's interesting now to take a bit of a back step. So in the analog world, if you wanted data, you would get a bunch of paper notes and you would sit there and you would trawl through and you say, okay, fine, I need the pain score from recovery. I'd go to the recovery chart, take that data point out, and you'd make a spreadsheet of all of your data metrics, and then you'd sit there filling in the spreadsheet in. On the flip side, the management team have got a bit cleverer. They know that there's lots of system data in the system, and they have what we call a business intelligence team that actually extracts that business data. And most of that is kind of operational. So if you wanted to say, here's operating theatre efficiency, how much of my theatre utilization do we use? Are we using 80% of our allocated time? How many pre-assessment appointments do we book? How many? So in terms of operational and what I call management data, they have a business intelligence team who is a person trained as an analyst in SQL and other bits of code, and they sit in the back end extracting data from what was Opera. So there are people who do data extraction for management, but there are not people that do data extraction for clinical if you're looking at the analog world. So now let's just say we've digitalized all of that, and all of a sudden people go, oh, we need data extraction. There is not a person that sits there extracting data on the clinical side of stuff. We've never had that role before. So I think with digitalization, we've created new needs and new wants. We've got people that want to be able to say, okay, well, tell me how many patients have had a UTI in pre-assessment. Tell me how many people have had COVID. How many of our operations went back to theatre? We've got a clinical need. We've always had the clinical need, but we've never had the capability before. So Cogito is a reporting team, and there are what I call two sides to it. There's the front end reporting and the back end reporting. Okay, and so we're going to go a little bit into how the databases and how Epic is sorted out on the back end. You will see the front end, you see notes, you see how you put data in. There are these things called data warehouses, and the main data warehouses where we extract data from are called Clarity and Caboodle. Don't ask me why they're named that, they just are. There's probably a reason on the back end. Epic usually thinks about how they name these things. But if you liken it to filing, so data items, so for example, did the patient have hypertension? Did the patient have diabetes? It's basically like writing it on a piece of paper, and then if you write it in a note, it's like chucking it on a desk that looks like the left-hand side. So Epic tries to kind of file things and tag things and put them into folders and organize them in a nice, neat fashion, like a filing cabinet, and put things into folders. Now the folders are called encounters. And we then label every single piece of data, like hypertension, we would like to be labeled with a data tag so that we can actually find it afterwards. So if I wanted to go and search for somebody that had hypertension, I'd want to know that I want to go to the anaesthetic or theatre encounter, the theatre folder, because I want to know if the patient had hypertension prior in the pre-assessment, for example. I want to go to the pre-assessment encounter, which is the pre-assessment folder, and look in that folder to say, did the patient have hypertension at that particular point in time? But without filing the things into the correct folder and without data tagging them in the correct way, it's like trying to find how many people were hypertensive with the left-hand side of the desk. It's pretty difficult. And it is possible, you can get computer code to do it, but it requires SQL code, it requires people to actually look in data lakes, and it requires clever things that I don't really understand. What I want to know is, can I click a button, can I get a report, and can I pull all of the patients that are hypertensive in theatres? If you open your patient via patient station, it will open a screen like this. And you then need to select the correct encounter to make sure that you file your piece of, that you're in the correct encounters, that you're actually putting your data into the correct folder. Most people, I think, that have used Cerner probably will find any one of these and just go, yeah, I'll just open any of these and just double click randomly, which means that your data is then potentially filing into the wrong place. So I worry a lot about this. You know, I dream about this sometimes at night, because I'm just like, oh my God, like our filing system is really, really bad. And there's another type of database called Chronicles. So Chronicles is a bit like a tree and a branch. It's the front end database that we use. And basically, if you think of the trunk as the patient, what you do is effectively you look for the patient's chart, and then you go, okay, fine, well, actually, they had this encounter, which is a branch. And within that branch, actually, we had some data pieces, and the data items are like the leaves. So it goes down the tree and down the branch to look at the leaf. But in order to find data on a large scale, you don't want the computer code to be looking at every single branch, every single trunk, every single branch, and then to try and find that leaf. It becomes really, really slow. But it really is really, really good for instant access, visible updates, and patient notes. So it's super fast at being able to give you your clinical stuff. So it's a front end database. And what happens with Chronicles on the front end is you put some data in at the front, and I think it's on a daily basis. Basically, the Chronicles database speaks to the Clarity and Caboodle databases and says, right, actually, what we want to do is actually file all of this data away, and it takes all of the leaves and it says, okay, fine, here we are in an encounter. I'm going to stick this into a grid graph kind of database into the filing cabinet, and I'm going to file this and data tag it in the correct way. So Clarity and Caboodle are the two databases that we use for analytical purposes, but the key point is you need to know where to find it. You absolutely have to data tag if you want front-end reporting to be possible. Back-end reporting is possible. You know, you can basically look on that desk of mess, and Steve Harris, Tim Benici can find those bits of data. But the messier the desk is, the harder the code is, because you actually have to code for sort of different scenarios, et cetera, et cetera. So that requires somebody who knows what they're doing to find that piece of paper on that desk. Whereas what I want to try and get us to is for basic perioperative metrics to have it filed in the filing cabinet so that you guys can actually just go into the Epic reporting tools and do it yourself. So there's sort of three categories of basic types of data. One is system data. This is the stuff that the business intelligence team would have always done. So operative timings, time and recovery, procedures, admission discharge dates, you know, staffing, et cetera, et cetera. And on the back end, these things out of the box are pretty much configured. So we can already do this pretty well. You know, this is really key to the operational capability of the organization. So this bit is hard coded into Epic. You can't really change a lot of this stuff. It does require a little bit of user engagement. So the recovery nurses, for example, they are very trained in marking the patient when they arrive in recovery and marking the patient when they leave. If you ask the clinicians, however, how many people actually start data when they meet the patient? How many people click anesthesia ready when they're ready from their anesthetic? I've seen people just click all the way through all of the event buttons one after another, which means that it times your anesthetic based on those event buttons. So I think the nursing staff are better at doing this than we are, and we need to get better at this if our data is to start meaning anything useful. So for example, if I want to know how long does my anesthetic take, I need to actually make sure that I click the button at the right time to actually time myself, or make sure that my anesthetic start and my anesthetic ready is done at the correct times. Then we move on to structured data, and here's some sort of examples that I'm hoping you've come across. In anesthesia, in pre-assessment, we have things like the DASI score, and it looks a bit like this, where you've got the little grid graph thing. It says DASI scoring. There's a little pencil that says if you want to edit it, and there's a new reading button that you click if you want to open a new reading. It then kind of opens out to the questions, which is the 12 questions, and then it can calculate you a score. These are super quick to build, And I think in the ITU build, which some of you may be a bit more familiar with, you can see a number of different examples, like the ICNARC on the ICU admission form. There's the ICNARC tab, you've got clinical frailty scale, you've got, I think, delirium scoring, delirium assessments, et cetera, all of those have been built out. But I've done a number of trawls of the ITU patients, having a look at the ITU admission tab and saying, how many people have these things filled in? And pretty much it's zero. Pretty much from all admissions for ITU, all of your structured data pretty much says zero. Nobody fills this in. There's a second way that we can do structured data, which is in smart lists. And therefore, when you create a note, you have a note template, you can click the F2 button, it brings you through to a drop-down menu, and then you click these things. When you start looking at usability and click counts, actually, I think this is not, you have to F2, find your left mouse button, have your right mouse button, and then it involves a lot of different kind of clicks here with your mouse and your keyboard to actually fill this in. So probably people quite like this, and it is possible to tag all of these bits of data. So did your patient need inotrops or vasopressors? And it is possible to data tag these. People probably quite like them. I think it's actually, when you don't know what usability is about, it's actually quite, I think, clicky. And I don't think it's very usable, as a personal opinion. And then you've got the smart forms, where you'll be familiar with the pre-evaluation. Every single one of these buttons is data tagged. So technically speaking, we can come to this smart form. We can find all asthmatics that are in pre-assessment. The slight problem with this is that this is a customization of a build, and asthma will not flow necessarily to the problem list in, so in terms of data flow, it's not great. In terms of being able to find the information, in terms of reporting, yes, we can find it. But if you look at the system, that asthma button will not say on the ITU side, this patient is asthmatic. So therefore, how do you put data in a system-wide manner? That's the problem list. So past medical history should really go into the problem list, because when you open Haiku, it shows you the summary of the patient, it shows you the active problem list. When you go to ITU, if they use the problem smart link, it will pull through. So, a smart form is a way to tag data, but from a system perspective, I would probably say the problem list is a better way to do it. And particularly because a lot of other things drive off the problem list, like the self-reporting tools. So I just wanted to come to this piece. Admitting an ITU patient, I'm assuming most people here probably are at ITU. There are a number of kind of bits of data that are already built into the system. And I just wanted to do a straw poll. I don't know how many people are on this call. But if we said, which data sets have you routinely completed? I just wanted to give a couple of minutes to say how many people have completed this before. How many people are on this call?
Looks like 17 of us, Mel.
Okay, cool. So pull out your phones, go to menti.com, put in the code 80601847, and just complete how many times, when you've admitted a patient to ITU, and I mean, Jed's here and he's anaesthesia, how many of you have actually filled this in? And if you worked on COVID during COVID times, the COVID symptoms was there in the ITU build. I don't know if this is actually going to log. Can you tell me, somebody tell me, if you're logged in, and does it show the correct screen to do a vote?
I'm logged in and it shows the list that you have in front of you shows on the screen as well.
Great. So if you just vote for what you have done, hopefully, I'm hoping it will do a live, although I think, yeah, there you go. Six people have now voted. Yeah, there we go. So this is a measure of your user engagement. So if you want data on the other end, and we want to extract this, how many of your users are putting your data in on the front end? And as you can see, it's not that different from the 5 people that I had before. I'll give it a couple more minutes and then I'm going to move on. So we're probably the best part is problem list, but I think I've given a number of talks on problem list, and literally every time I meet somebody, I'm like, put the past medical history in the problem list. But we're still probably what, 50% to 60% of the way there in terms of, do we have a quality data set to actually start reporting off of? And I think that tells us the story enough that we're not really using the system. How do I get out of this? Escape. Yeah. So the next little query is, what's the reason you didn't put the data in? And I understand why people might not do it. Out of interest, what are the other reasons? Put them in the chat box, or you can shout out.
Well, I'm going to say sort of not part of my remit on ITU, or at least I didn't think it was. You know, the patient admissions get done by the SHOs, I think, most of the time. So not something I come across, I'm afraid. So
interestingly, I think as a consultant-led service, I think we do need to, as you're going around on the ward round, say, oh yeah, okay, fine, tell me about this patient. Did you put it in the problem list? Is that in the problem list? And I think it's going to be a simple thing like just voicing, did this go into the problem list? Did you fill out that piece of smart data form? Because if you guys want the data out of it, you're going to have to teach the SHOs and engage the SHOs when they're doing the admissions, explaining to them, this is why we need this. So I'm going to stop the quizzes there and go back to the presentation. Because we've got, we do have reporting. So unstructured data requires a human to go through and potentially sift through it. It's time consuming and it's expensive. I'm just going to close the door because my husband is clattering plates around and doing washing up. So it's potentially not machine readable, and it's difficult to search using code and algorithms. And the data integrity and quality of the data that you're putting in is really, really important. If we want self-guided reporting, we need to be using structured data. So how do I get data out of Epic? This is like the nuts and bolts. There are kind of two ways for, if it's a proper research study with ethics, et cetera, then you can go to my UCLH and search DEX. And it asks you, it's a very short form. It says like, what data do you want out? And then you fill the form in and it goes to, basically it goes to Steve Cohn and Wai Kyung. So given that I said to you before that we have not got the clinical analytics, we've not got the people with the right kind of skills, you can go to UCLH, and I tried this. I wanted my cystectomy data, a cystectomy quality assessment kind of, et cetera. So I filled out 3 requests on DEX. So I've done this. And basically then I said to Steve Cohn about 4 weeks later going, nobody's replied to me. And he was like, oh yeah, that's because basically it comes to me. And I'm like, right, okay, you've clearly got another job to do. So we don't have the capability right now of somebody to actually pull that data for us. If it's operational or service improvement data, then you can go via the Epic expert team, the management team, and that goes to another little person called Monica in the business intelligence team. And I've worked out that it's her and 2 minions, but they are responsible for doing all of the reports for Oscar about operational kind of stuff, about cancellations, and so they are obviously that they've got a full-time job dealing with Oscar and his reports. But sometimes I can sneak in the odd kind of thing saying, oh, actually, can you quickly just pull how many pre-assessment appointments, how many duplicates we have, and how many people went through this clinic code, and they can pull those things relatively easily. The other way of getting stuff is if you know the data tag, you can go to Tim Benici ask very sweetly and bring him a bottle of wine and say, can you quickly tell me how many times this button has been pressed? And he's like, oh yeah, actually I've got a little piece of code and I can do that for you. But it's relying on probably 2 or 3 people within the trust to actually get our data out of the back end if we're not using structured data. Now, what I want to move towards is actually self-service reporting, because it is capable, it is possible. We've got 3 different formats. We've got reporting workbench, slicer dicer, and radar dashboards. And what I liken it to is basically the sandwich shop. So if you have put your stuff, if you've got your compost heap, it's very difficult to find your tomato that you need to put on your sandwich. Not that you'd want to put a tomato from a compost heap onto your sandwich. But if you put all your tomatoes with the tomatoes and you put all your cheese with the cheese, actually it's very easy to go to the shelf and pick out, here's my ingredients that I want. And then you can make yourself a little sandwich. And there are obviously some kind of pre-reporting stuff. So there's going to be stuff like how many diabetics went through pre-assessment, how many hypertensives went through pre-assessment, how many people had a length of stay above 7 days. Those sorts of things I call out of the box. They're like your ready packaged sandwich, and it will be possible to do that. But we will need to do a little bit of setting up, and I'll explain why in a couple of seconds. So Slicer Dicer is a reporting tool that I'm going to show you in a second. It's fundamentally driven by the problem list. So you can see how easy it is, but if it's not in the problem list, you can't get a data, what I call a data integrity. Your data integrity is questionable if you're not putting it in at the front end. Reporting workbench is a bit more customizable. Currently, it's working for system data. Perioperative metrics is possible, and I think this is probably where we want to get to in terms of where POM fellows can actually get their own data out. We are currently battling a little bit with information governance. You can, technically speaking, give everybody access to exporting an Excel spreadsheet from reporting workbench, but right now the security has been taken away because we think, okay, Jill and the kind of information governance team said, okay, well, do we want to give 10,000 people the capability and being able to export patient level data? Now I've got a dog that's moaning. So currently you cannot share or export these Excel spreadsheets, which is probably where we really want to get to, but we need to just tread the information governance territory carefully, and we've never had this problem before, so actually the red tape etc is quite a lot at the moment. And then there's radar dashboards, which are probably key departmental quality metrics. That's probably just like click a button and off you go. I'm going to show you what Slicer Dicer looks like. So I've got the pilot version. It would basically be a button at the top, or that you would chart search. So you press control space and you chart search Slicer Dicer. At the moment, it's only working for the inpatients and not for anaesthesia. Anaesthesia has a different registry, but this is looking at the inpatient registry, and it's taken one person almost 2 years to actually validate and qualify all of the metrics so that we can actually start using this. But this basically is saying, how many patient records do we have in Epic at the moment? We've got 292,130. And what I want to do is say, tell me about all the diabetic patients. So you can immediately see it codes and says, do you want to know where diabetic foot is in the diagnosis? Do you want to know where the diabetic foot ulcer had? Do you want to know about diabetics on insulin as a diagnosis? Do you want to know about how many ketoacidotic patients turned up? Let's just try that one, for example. And it then says, okay, we're looking at all of those records that we had 2 million or whatever. In the last 6 months, 24 patients had a diagnosis coded as diabetic ketoacidosis. And then if I wanted to find out, okay, fine, how many of those are on metformin? You'd say, okay, let's slice that down by medication. Let's have a look at the outpatient medications, because were they on metformin as a, I haven't tried this one before, but there you go, metformin. How many of those patients were on metformin? So 10 or less of the patients. So it doesn't actually drill you down to single digits, but it will drill you down to like less than 10 patients were on metformin, and these other people, which kind of makes sense because actually diabetic ketoacidosis, they probably are on insulin, they're probably type 1 diabetics. And then you can stratify by dates. You can do a number of other little things. You can make some other different graphs, etc., etc. But that is what Slicer Dicer kind of does. It gives you a hunch or the ability to kind of drill down into a hunch. It does not give you data that you can publish. It doesn't give you data that you can do research topics on, because it doesn't give you patient level Excel spreadsheet type stuff. But if you're doing a quick audit, tell me how many patients are hot in recovery or cold in recovery, it might tell you something like that. We have not set up our registry metrics yet, so we cannot do anaesthesia Slicer Dicer, but I think this is probably quite a nice tool that would probably answer quite a lot of at least the basic kind of audits that we generally do on a day-to-day basis. So the second one I wanted to show you is the what we call the reporting workbench. So this is a reporting workbench report, and I realize I've got like 10 minutes left. If you go to my reports, if you don't have the my reports at the top, you can find it usually in your Epic menu, so reports, and then you've got stuff in here. But if you go to the reporting, this is reporting workbench, and you can make your own reports, and this is one that I made earlier, pure Blue Peter style. You can search what we call the anaesthesia records, anaesthesia registry, or all kind of cases, and then you'd have to kind of run a new report, and then you basically customize what you want to see. So you want to look for your criteria, add your criteria. I don't know if there's surgeon in here, you want to add your surgeons, and then you want to say that you want the surgeons to equal to, I don't know, obituary. There you go. So I want to know all of Austin obituaries, procedures, and then you can actually then drill down and say, okay, actually, here's my custom list. So this is about picking your stuff off the shelf. So if your item of information is in a structured data format, we can basically stick the structured data formats in here. So your clinical frailty scale, for example, we can custom metric this, and then you basically stick your own report together, you add them to this side, and then you just run a report. Now, if we look at one that I did earlier, you can then look at your data set. You can then say, I want a pie chart of my length of stay. So this is how I made a pie chart. 34 of my 47 patients had a 1-day length of stay. 8 of my 47 had a 2-day length of stay, and then we've got some other things. Interestingly, you can then stratify by which surgeons are operating on them. So equally, most surgeons have equal numbers of cases. What's our surgical procedure times? So this measures from procedure start to procedure end, the event times, and you can see, okay, fine, this is how long my procedures are taking. And interestingly, we've got a lot more different anaesthetists than surgeons. So we're definitely not matching our surgeons with anaesthetists. And that might be an example of variability. So reporting workbench has a lot more capability. And the radar dashboards I'm quickly going to show you. We've set up very, very basic stuff, but this would be how many people did I have as an ASA score over the last 2 months? What did my patients look like? And we can set, what we're trying to do is get to a logbook. So our first priority is trying to get a logbook out of Epic, which you would think is very, very straightforward, but this tells me my ASA scores. I've got 40% of my patients are ASA 2, 30% are ASA 3, and I've got, interestingly, 12% are ASA 4. But you remember, this is like quite a small number of cases. So this is an example of a radar dashboard. They're ready-made. You just click the button, you run the report, and it's there. It sits on the dashboard, and everybody has this. You can switch to different dashboards by having a look up here. So you click on there, and there's you can have learning home dashboards. We've got one where we're just making at the moment all of the guidelines, etc., can go up there. So those are effectively your 3 different ways of reporting. And why is it that we've got a bit of a problem? Foundation System Build basically reports, and it has out of the box reports, and it's all lined up. It's all perfectly functional. But when you customize, you basically take out the piece of the Foundation System Build, and if we actually did that at Go Live and we actually lined up the reporting metric at the same time, then the reporting metric will work. So if I run a report on diabetics, it will look at diabetics. But we did do a lot of customization that we didn't do the reporting lining up. So actually one of the pieces of work we're doing at the moment is kind of going back to these and saying, okay, well, where have we broken the build, and where do we actually need to actually fix all of these little metrics? So we've got a prioritization. The first thing is to get the anaesthetic logbook out so that people can run a 3-month logbook or whatever. And then we're kind of looking to try and do some pre-assessment, you know, COVID and quality metrics. And then we're probably looking at the perioperative stuff, which is the data set that Pete Odell wants out the back. And in order to try and help with this, we've got 2 data science fellowships coming out. One is to look at enhanced recovery and how we measure enhanced recovery within the hospital. The other one is to look at how do we look at perioperative metrics, and that's sort of starts from pre-assessment, but also data flows, and how do we actually get to reporting workbench, and how do we get to self-service reporting. And I would want self-service reporting to be kind of the primary 60% of how we get data out. You will always have Steve Harris and those sorts of people that can get sort of bigger data sets and big data, but on a very fundamentally basic level, I think we need the capability to be able to do a lot of this DIY stuff ourselves, but it does require structured data input. We've got 3 minutes to go, and I just wanted to take any questions.